Friends from the media, good morning.
新冠肺炎疫情爆发以来，
Since the outbreak of
党中央、国
COVID-19,
务院审
the
时度势，
CPC Central
带
Committee
领
and the
全
State
国各族
Council
人民采取非常
have rallied the people of all country
战争，
to take unusual measures to fight this all-out war against the epidemic.
又及时调
After we have preliminarily contained the epidemic, we are taking measures to promote region-specific and categorized resumption of work and production across the country. Coordinated resumption of work and production is a very important matter for the economic and social progress of our country. General Secretary Xi Jinping has stressed on many occasions that malfunction of one link would impede operations of both upstream and downstream enterprises, that a nationwide and unified approach must be adopted to advance full-scale coordinated resumption of work of all links, including the upstream and the downstreams, the manufacturers, the suppliers, and the sellers, and the businesses of all sizes, to raise the efficiency and performance of work resumption. At a State Council executive meeting chaired by Premier Li Keqiang on March the 10th, plans were laid out to keep the industry chain and flow of capital smooth and running to facilitate coordinated resumption of work. The MIIT has been earnestly implementing the decisions of the CPC Central Committee and the State Council and worked with relevant authorities with stronger sense of duty to promote orderly resumption of work of industrial businesses. On February the 13th, we have established a leading group on resumption of work at our ministry, and we have introduced the 20 policy measures on helping businesses to resume their operations, and we have arranged 2 video conferences on relevant work. And we have laid out guiding opinions for resumption of work and production for businesses. We have sent resident liaison officers to 7 key industrial provinces to ensure relevant policies are delivered on the ground and help resolve difficulties and needs of enterprises. With the strong leadership from the CPC Central leadership and with the cooperation from different localities, we're seeing a positive momentum in the resumption of work. Outside Hubei, the average resumption rate of large industrial enterprises is over 95%. The average return rate of staff is about 80%. The resumption rate of medium and small-sized businesses has reached nearly 60%. Still, they are facing some shortages in funding, staff, and supply. So we are seeing a generally low efficiency of the function of industrial chain. At the same time, the spread of the virus in the world is also creating a lot of uncertainties for the resumption of work in our country. In the future, our ministry will continue to take results-oriented actions to promote coordinated resumption of work and production at the upstream and the downstream element of businesses of all sizes, with a focus on the catalytic role of key major businesses. And we will keep the flow of capital and the industrial chain up and running. First, we will promote spring farming with a focus on key enterprises. We have laid out a catalog of flagship enterprises, and we will focus on the catalytic role of these enterprises to help boost the resumption of small and medium-sized businesses. And they will work on the supply of raw materials, the transportation, and funding issues. And second, we will fully leverage the coordinating mechanism of State Council on resumption of work and to promote the delivery of supportive measures to help businesses survive this difficult period. And third, we will adopt a categorized approach in light of the intensity of the epidemic. to help advance the resumption of work. And fourth, we will use our existing measures to promote the stability of the global supply chain, including in sectors like automobiles and pharmaceuticals. Going forward, we'll focus on the key links of the industry chain and ensure our policy measures are delivered on the ground to the full extent. We'll do our best to minimize the impact of the epidemic and ensure the industrial performance go within the proper range. That concludes my opening remarks. Now I give the floor to Ms. Yang.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends from the media, good morning. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19, CPIRC has been studying and implementing thoroughly the important guidelines and instructions given by General Secretary Xi Jinping. We've been following the decisions made by the Central Party Committee and State Council, individually or collectively issued 9 documents to provide better financial services to epidemic control and economic development. First, credit and lending support in key areas. For the first 2 months of this year, financial institutions have increased their lending and loans by 4.2 trillion RMB yuan, an increase of 130.8 billion yuan year-on-year. Up to now, banks and financial institutions have provided lending support of over 1.4 trillion RMB yuan, especially support to private companies and SMEs, as well as in areas of manufacturing, spring sowing, and farming. Second, temporary deferring of interest payment and principal repayment for hard-hit companies. For SMEs, particularly owners of small and micro businesses, household companies, if they are hit hard by the outbreak, their lending shall not be cut off, delayed, or undercut. By market-based and law-based principles for loans to be repaid since 25th of January, a longer grace time is permitted. For the truck drivers and taxi drivers and certain groups who cannot conduct business as usual because of the outbreak of the COVID-19, these groups are also subject to the favorable policy if they have loans for business purposes. Personal loans repayment is also adjusted with certain extent of flexibility. And this second front of work is mainly targeted at existing loans, that is, the loans and credit already rolled out. If there is difficulty in repayment caused by the outbreak, then the repayment is deferred. And this deferring is not automatic. The credit appliers, the borrowers, they need to apply for the extension of the repayment to the banks, and the banks will process and review the application. Third, insurance institutions are encouraged to help companies tide over difficulties. Insurance institutions are encouraged to give waivers and exemptions, deferring insurance contributions payment to support SMEs in terms of property insurance, responsibility, export credit insurance, etc. And for vehicles, ships, and aircraft out of service during the outbreak, insurance fees can also be waived as appropriate. Life insurance companies are also encouraged to extend the time frame for the impawning of a guarantee slip. For instance, if some small business owners or household business owners, if they have had guarantee slips with life insurance companies. In the past, the maturity time frame was approximately 6 months, but during the outbreak, this time frame can be extended as appropriate and depending on the actual cases. Recently, in accordance with instructions given by the executive meeting of the State Council, we've been timely implementing and studying the work to support resumption of work in financial industry. First, strengthen support for core companies in industrial chains. We are going to encourage banks to collaborate more closely with core companies in the industrial chains, step up liquidity support, ensure reasonable credit lines so that these leading companies, when they get the financing support from the banks, they could make prepayment to other companies in the upper and lower streams of the industrial chains so that other companies will have less liquidity pressure and fewer financing support costs. Second, upgrade financing services to up and downstream companies in the industrial chains. We will encourage banks to use receivables, warehouse receipts, inventory pledge as means of financing support. They are also encouraged to reduce as appropriate the share of acceptance bill deposit for companies with sound record so that these companies will have bigger liquidity. Thirdly, strengthen coordinated development of the global industrial chains. Banks are encouraged to strengthen financing support for foreign trade, and these measures include the increase of financing support to foreign-related companies, while implement the deferring of payment of interests and repayment of loans for hard-hit but promising medium and small and micro foreign trade businesses. Their repayment of loans could be extended to a certain extent even beyond the 30th of June. If they have such needs, they could reach out to their banks for detailed consultation. But these have to be hard-hit but promising medium, small, and micro businesses engaged in foreign trade. And the cases shall be handled by a case-to-case approach. We will also encourage commercial insurance companies in carrying out short-term export insurance businesses and cut the fees as appropriate. Fourthly, we shall apply financial science and technologies to upgrade financial services for supply chains. Capable banks are encouraged to develop operation systems for supply chains so as to provide more convenient and faster financing services to their customers. Policy banks and commercial banks shall step up collaboration with private internet companies to provide more targeted and tailored financing support to small and micro companies. Those private banks operating through the internet, one advantage they have is big data. They basically rely on the internet for their operation. They may not have as much cash liquidity as conventional banks. So that is why we encourage policy banks to transfer some funds to internet banks. And the internet banks, they have big data. They know a lot about small and micro companies and private companies. So through this pattern of cooperation, more tailored and targeted support shall be able to reach SMEs. Going forward, the CPIRC will follow through on the instructions given by the Central Committee and the State Council, supervise the insurance and banking institutions to fully deliver on these policies. Now the floor is open. With CGTN, I have two questions. The first one is on coordinated resumption of the work across the supply chains. What are the specific measures? And the second part of my question, in terms of finance, what specific measures will be given to speed up liquidity flow across the supply chain? On 3rd of February, General Secretary Xi gave the important guidelines concerning the resumption of economic operation. Ever since then, localities and businesses have started the resumption of production in a gradual manner. With joint efforts during the past months, a lot of progress has been made. But in the actual process, there are still some specific obstacles or difficulties, and they could be summarized as follows. The first one is lack of personnel flow. Different localities have different grades of epidemic control, so companies still face lack of a shortage of labor force, especially some of their employees. If they are in hard-hit areas, they cannot really leave that place to go to the places of their work. For instance, if an employee of a company in Guangdong might live in Hubei Province, so up till now he or she may still not be able to return to work. And because of the quarantine measures, some of the key technicians of companies can still cannot come back to work. And second is lack of liquidity in logistics. Those hard-hit regions still have difficulties in the resumption of logistical support. That also leads to difficulties in resumption of work in some leading companies. The third difficulty is in terms of the cash flow. Some small and medium companies in some localities, they still feel difficult to get access to favorable policies or policy support. And the fourth difficulty is related to the supply of raw materials. Some leading raw material companies are yet to restart their production and work. That also leads to difficulties for the resumption of other companies who need those raw materials. And fifth difficulty is related to the supplies necessary for epidemic control. The production capacity for epidemic control supplies has been increased markedly, yet the gap still remains and is still not small. For instance, the gap between supply and demand in terms of face masks and other supplies. In response to these difficulties, the related government departments have been working together to implement the policies. Some progress has been made, yet much needs to be done. Specifically, our ministry will focus on the following. First, help with gradual resumption of work in key industrial chains. The MIIT will take the lead in coordinating with other departments to set up a special task force to coordinate on cross-region, cross-sector issues. To explain, because some resources are in the hands of different departments, so there requires closer coordination across the region and across the department. With the establishment of this task force, we will bring together agencies responsible for transportation, funding, and all those fronts, as I mentioned earlier. And second, in addition, we will also strengthen support to leading companies and their supportive companies in the key areas, so that we could build up the whole system of the industrial chains and to make sure the stability of domestic supply chains. Second, we will step up efforts to support medium and small and micro companies. They represent the majority of the industrial chains. We will fully leverage our role as the coordinator for State Council's leading group to promote development of SMEs. We will ensure full implementation of the supporting policies in finance and taxation and fiscal areas. We will continue to straighten out administrative charges to reduce the financial burden for SMEs during this special period of time. And third, we will strengthen the momentum for resumption of work across the industrial chains. We will work with the related parties to boost domestic demand, foster greater development in new business sectors and new forms of business, such as remote medical care, online education, and online office operation. We will also bolster the development of infrastructure for 5G network, the Internet of Things, big data, artificial intelligence, and smart cities. We shall also follow closely the progress in those key projects, especially foreign-funded or foreign trade-related projects, to boost demand and consumption to support the economic development. The journalist has asked about specific measures in terms of providing financing support. My colleague from MIIT has somehow touched upon difficulties related to financing. For instance, difficult access to more credit and lending support. Indeed, affected by the COVID-19 outbreak, companies are still in different stages of resuming production. Yet the industrial chains are deeply interconnected and integrated, which means that every sector affects every sector. And to ensure smooth resumption of work, there requires a stable source of fund. So which are the points of difficulties? We think there are 2 points. First one is related to leading companies. These leading companies in the industrial chains, they may occupy the source of funds which could have been given to other companies in upper and lower streams of the industrial chains. And second difficulty in response to these difficulties, we will strengthen our work in the following areas. First one, we will focus on the core companies. The core and the leading companies, they are the most important for the smooth operation of the entire industrial chains. In this connection, we will do 2 things specifically. The first thing is to support these core companies in resuming their own operation and production. These companies, they themselves may face liquidity issues because of the outbreak. We will encourage banks to provide more lending support to these companies. And the second specific thing is we will encourage these leading companies also play their part in supporting the SMEs in the upper and the lower streams of their industrial chains. To do that, we will give some lending support to these core companies so that they have adequate cash liquidity. And then if they have already received goods from, for instance, another company in the upper stream of the industrial chain, then this core company or this leading company can repay the money to that upper stream company. To put it simply, the core companies are encouraged and helped to extend the cash liquidity to upper and lower streams of the industrial chain. If they have not yet received goods from the upper stream company, then we still encourage the core companies to pay in cash advance payment to the upper stream company, so that the upper stream company will face lesser pressure of cash, so that it can better engage in normal operation. And for companies in the downstream, now in actual practice, the core companies, some of them, they adopt a policy of payment first, goods later. This is their approach to the downstream company. In that way, they actually occupy much amount of the cash flow in the industrial chain. So to address this, we provide funding support to the core companies to ask them to reduce the share of down payment for lower stream operators. That is to say, we ask those core companies to give, to relax the requirements of the so-called payment first, the goods later approach, so that the lower stream companies will face lesser pressure. So these are some of the things the CBIRC is doing to ensure smooth flow of capital. And the next second major aspect of our work is related to those upper and downstream companies. Specifically, if core companies have difficulties in paying in cash the advance payment to upper and lower streams companies, we try some other approach. For instance, banks based on real-life transaction, such as means of contracts or receipts, then in that case, the banks could directly provide lending in terms of receivables to upstream suppliers. That is, if you are an upstream supplier, if you have those concrete evidence like contracts or receipts, if you show them to the banks, then you could be given account receivables and some lending support. This is a way of bolstering cash liquidity across the industrial chain. And secondly, for those lower stream operators or businesses, for them, we encourage banks to provide them with warehouse receipts, inventory pledges, and other means of lending support, as well as order-based advance payment. That is to say, if you can prove to the banks you have real contracts, if you can show contracts, warehouse receipts to the banks, you could use these as evidence to get lending support from banks. And thirdly, for epidemic-affected yet promising companies, they are subject to reduction of the share of acceptance bill deposit and waiving of procedure fees. These are all measures to increase the cash liquidity available to the companies. But I want to stress that all of these support are based on the concrete evidence of transactions. They requires credibility, honesty, and compliance with law for all companies in getting the policy support, as I mentioned. All in all, we will try to provide support as much as we can and as much as we should. The roadblocks, as mentioned by the journalist, in terms of the financial flow. So in sum, my answer is we help leading companies, upper and downstream companies, help them to take some measures to ensure smooth flow of capital. And second, we help banks to support the work in this area. So my answer can be summarized in these two areas. With China National Radio, we have noticed that the outbreak has dealt a heavy flow to private SMEs and household businesses. So what specific measures, including financial measures, to be given to those companies? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. The SMEs have a relatively lower capacity to fend off risks, and they are heavily hit by the epidemic, and it's more difficult for them to resume work. As the competent authority for SMEs, Our ministry is working on how to better resolve difficulties and needs of the SMEs. That is high on our agenda. According to decisions made by the CPC Central Committee and the State Council, localities and relevant departments have introduced a series of fiscal, tax, financial, and social security policies to help SMEs advance resumption of work and production in an orderly manner. The first is cutting taxes and fees to relieve the burden of businesses. For example, provisionally lowering the VAT tax rate of small-scale taxpayers and provisionally exempting SMEs of employers' contribution to pension fund, unemployment, and workplace injury insurances, and provisionally exempting contribution to basic medical insurance. We have encouraged localities to lower or exempt land use tax to facilitate cut of rents and help reduce the cost of businesses. All those measures are taken in accordance with the decisions from the central leadership. For example, in Qingdao City, they have established a good landlord platform, and information will be posted daily on the platform regarding industrial parks, innovation bases, and maker spaces, which have cuts for rents or fees. And by March the 12th, 187 good landlords have provided rent cuts for 8,292 businesses or household businesses, and the amount is 159.27 billion yuan. And second, we are strengthening financial support to help relieve the businesses' financial difficulties, like mentioned by Ms. Yang. We encourage financial institutions to give provisional deferment of loan principal and interest repayment for eligible SMEs with temporary liquidity difficulties. Real repayment can be deferred to June the 30th. We have increased the relending and rediscount quota and lowered the relending interest rate. We are supporting small and medium-sized banks to offer concessional loans to small and micro businesses. And they are good examples. For example, in Ningbo City, the Bank of Ningbo is providing 30-day zero-interest or low-interest loans to eligible small SMEs to resolve temporary financial needs of businesses in a fast way. Third, we're improving services to strengthen the confidence of businesses. On February the 9th, our ministry introduced a notice on strengthening work to help SMEs endure the epidemic. We're guiding localities to take a region-specific, categorized, and targeted measure to advance the resumption of work in SMEs. For example, the Guangdong Province has set up an online platform to respond to needs of SMEs. By March the 10th, they have handled 1,998 cases, and 98% of those cases have been resolved. So far, the ministry has set up a database of supportive policies for SMEs on www.gov.cn. And we have developed an application for determination of business sizes. On this website, SMEs are able to access their needed information. With the developed application, we have enabled SMEs to better understand the preferential policies they enjoy. We have launched online training courses and programs for SMEs. By March the 12th, we have put online 318 courses with more than 6 million visits. Fourth, we are strengthening coordination to promote smooth operation of the whole industry chain. Interruptions in the industry chain is the biggest difficulty in the resumption of work and production for SMEs. In light of the different interruptions and sticking points in the industry chain, we have worked with sectorial associations and experts to coordinate the resumption of work among more than 50 flagship and backbone enterprises and more than 7,000 core supportive SMEs. Many local provinces are following the approach of our ministry. For example, in Jiangxi Province, they have organized more than 20 coordination events to help match the demand and promote coordinated resumption. They have helped to resolve the difficulties for 64 businesses and for 65 suppliers of other provinces, and helped to resume the operations of 26 suppliers inside the province. In Fujian, the Xiamen City is setting a platform to match supply and demand of different sectors. In Shishi City, they have organized online selling event, and the contract amount was 53.76 million yuan on the opening day. In the next stage, we will work on the following four fronts to advance relevant work. The first is to fully leverage the role of the coordination mechanism to further promote awareness of preferential policies and ensure those policies are delivered on the ground in order to help SMEs survive the epidemic. Second, we will leverage the catalytic role of flagship enterprises. With a focus on these enterprises, we aim to promote integrated resumption and development of all sizes of businesses. Third, we will give priority to the demonstrated role of leading SMEs and advance orderly resumption of work of SMEs. Fourth, we'll fully leverage the service platforms and a new generation of information technology to provide better online and offline services for the resumption of work and production of SMEs. That concludes my answer, Ms. Xiao. About financial measures, thank you for your question. I believe that you have noticed that the upstream and downstream of core enterprises are mainly private enterprises and small and medium-sized and even micro-sized businesses. They are big in number but small in scales, so they are more vulnerable to risks and uncertainties. CBIRC attaches great importance to financial services for these businesses, and we have encouraged banks to give more credit line to private and small and micro businesses, many in the financial inclusion area. I will give you some numbers. In 2019, the loan borrowed by private businesses, new loan borrowed by private businesses was 4.4 trillion yuan, with number of borrowers increased by 31.5%. That is a very encouraging figure. That means a lot of businesses who never got loans from banks have been able to borrow from banks. And the annualized interest rate of them was down by 93 base points year on year. And nearly among the new loans, nearly 70% of them was medium to long-term loans. And those are the positive signs we have noticed. And this year, the CBIRC is continuing to encourage financial institutions to give more loans to businesses and lower the financing cost. According to some quick numbers from relevant authorities, we have seen that since the outbreak, the composite loan interest rate of businesses has lowered. The 51.35% of businesses are having a composite low interest rate lower than 5%. That means the financing cost of businesses has declined. And most of the SMEs are upstream and downstream of core enterprises. Like we mentioned when answering the first question, I think I have partially answered this question when taking the first one, so I will add a few more points. So in responding to this issue, we are also dealing with it on two fronts, that is the existing loans and the new loans. For existing loans, we ensure that loans to SMEs are not cut off, delayed, or undercut. That includes SMEs and micro business and household businesses. So they accounted for 22 million borrowers. More than 22 million borrowers, and including more than 14 million household businesses. Well, on the second front, we'll follow a market-based and law-based approach to make some arrangements. There will be provisional deferment of repayment of loan that have matured after January 25th. And for truck and taxi drivers, they can enjoy the same preferential policies as household businesses for their personal business loans. And for toll road operators that have difficulty in repaying their financial debts as a result of the toll-free policy, the banks may consider might support them by deferring interest payment, extending principal repayment, and rolling over maturing loans. And for some and banks can consider further rolling over the loans made to SMEs heavily affected by the epidemic, yet holding promising prospects. Recently, we have done a survey among 6 major provinces and some major banks. And now we have acquired some numbers. We have seen a quite huge number of household businesses are actually enjoying the benefits of these preferential policies from Huaxia Bank. We have known that some SMEs have received the benefits of these policies through loans and arrangements from the bank. Many businesses have proactively communicated with the financial institutions. And I believe in the future there will be more and more institutions delivering the policies and more businesses benefiting from them. So we'll continue to increase financial support and lending support for businesses. This year, we'll continue to encourage banks to strengthen strengthen the scale of support for small businesses, and at the same time lower the cost for financial support. We will also study the preferential rate for first-time borrowers. This will be factored in our future studies. We have asked the 5 state-owned large banks to ensure a no less than 30% increase of the financial inclusion support for SMEs in the first half of this year. And we have provided the policy banks will increase a special credit line of 350 billion yuan, and which will be given to private and SMEs at a preferential rate. And financial institutions will strive to increase 500 billion yuan of loan to household businesses. And those are the measures and considerations we have for providing financial support to SMEs. Next question. American press. Now the virus is spreading very quickly in the world, especially in North America and Europe. Do you have any analysis on the impact of China's manufacturing sector, particularly on the SMEs? Any policy considerations?
Could you please repeat your question? The outbreak has also emerged in some other countries, especially European countries and in the United States. How will that affect manufacturing sector in China? What policies will be introduced in response? The spread of the infections is broader than what's been expected. We now live in an age of globalized industrial production. European countries and United States, they also now encounter more infections. Outbreaks there will have some impact on the manufacturing in China, more or less. Yet, I think it is now still early to make judgment because we still need to see how the situation will develop on the ground, how well other countries can respond to the outbreaks. If the things are brought under control fairly quickly, then the impact on China's manufacturing will be limited. If things linger on for longer time, then the impact could be bigger. Yet I want to say that China has the full-fledged and most diversified industrial system. We have a big domestic market. The fundamentals are in sound shape. So we have domestic consumption needs, and we have this well-developed, full-fledged industrial system. With all these, we will see rather limited impact. That said, China is deeply engaged in global industrial chains. What is happening outside, like it or not, will make some impact on the Chinese economy. So we will collaborate with other governments in policy coordination. So together we could have a better resumption of economic operation and tide over the difficulties. The industrial chains are interconnected and integrated. One block will affect upper and lower streams companies. So what CBRIRC is doing in terms of long-term policy support. In my earlier remarks, I have mentioned some ad hoc arrangements. For instance, appropriately raising financing support in the form of account receivables, warehouse receipts, and inventory pledges. These are temporary arrangements. For instance, we also encourage bankers to reduce their acceptance deposit ratio for companies with good credit record. These are all short-term measures to boost cash liquidity across the industrial chain. The main consideration behind is that these companies have strained cash flow because of the outbreak of the COVID-19, and they need cash supply for the restart of their work. For example, they need to pay wages to their workers. In terms of supporting smaller companies, we will also roll out some yearly arrangements. As I said, for the 5 national banks, for the first half of 2020, they need to ensure no less than 30% increase of credit and lending support to smaller companies. And in the longer term, our policy direction will not change. Although the number may vary from year to year, yet the directions and the goals are consistent. To support smaller companies, we also have all kinds of policies. As I went over early, those include cash support to principal companies and their longer and their upper and lower stream firms. These are both in terms of short-term and long-term. For one thing, we will make cash flow smooth for the industrial chain. For other, we will support smaller companies in resolving their difficulties. You might have mentioned, by giving the example, I talked about the principal companies occupying some sources of fund in their industrial chain. It sounds more like principal companies in the manufacturing sector. But there are also principal companies of other types. For instance, platforms of e-commerce, major logistical companies, or travel agencies. They might also be principal companies in their own sector or in their own chain of industry. In recent days, we've been reaching out to these companies. We've been consulting with them, bringing together some bankers to figure out if there are more good measures to make cash flow in their industrial chains more smooth. We will assess the progress on a timely basis and to accumulate good experiences. Farmers Daily. Now it is in a critical stage of spring farming. Hubei is an important production area for
phosphatic fertilizer. How to ensure the normal function of this sector so that we will lose no time in organizing spring farming. General Secretary Xi Jinping has made important instructions on spring farming and stressed that we need to do our best to ensure farming will start in tandem with the season of spring and ensure a harvest in summer. To this end, we have made efforts on the following fronts. First, we are advancing and expediting the resumption of production of phosphatic fertilizer in Hubei. As you know, Hubei is a strong base for production of phosphatic fertilizer. In China, it accounts for 1/3 of China's total capacity. Yichang City is one of the most concentrated producing area in Hubei. On 23rd of February, Minister Miao Wei of MIIT had a video conference with Yichang City to know about the resumption of production among the phosphatic fertilizer companies in that city and discussed issues concerning transportation and funding of those companies. By March the 10th, Hubei Province has been mobilizing 24 ammonium phosphate producers, and 19 of them have resumed operation, and ammonium phosphate accounts for more than 80% of their operating capacity, and we expect more enterprises will resume operations in the near term. So their annual output would be more than 10 million tons. And the second, we are working across the industry chain to increase the total supply. We have strengthened coordination and monitoring of enterprises in other provinces, including Yunnan, Guizhou, and Sichuan. And on raw materials and ingredients, we have coordinated with relevant producers to have a more efficient supply of raw materials to all relevant companies. And on transportation and logistics, we have communicated with the railway authorities to help resolve difficulties of transportation. Some companies have produced ammonium phosphate fertilizers, but they are having difficulties to deliver them out. And on financing, we have communicated with the PBOC to resolve the liquidity difficulty of some major phosphate fertilizer companies. And third, we are strengthening our services for matching supply and demand of different regions. We are working with the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Areas and also local industrial regulators to balance the supply and demand in different provinces. By March the 11th, 12 provinces have requested balancing support. And in light of their locations and the capacity of producers to handle new orders, we have made some recommendations to those provinces. And in the future, we will continue to monitor the developments in this regard and to help mobilize more resources and better coordinate supply and demand. Next question. Thank you, Hong Kong media. China is a major automobile manufacturer and seller, and Hubei is an important base for manufacturing of components. And so are there any specific measures to promote the full industry chain resumption of the automobile sector? Thank you for your question. This automobile industry has a very long industry chain, and it covers a lot of areas and is one of the pillars of the economy. Chinese automobile companies also need to import components and parts from other countries, and our multinational companies need to import a lot of components from China. As we know, every vehicle has more than 10,000 components, and every automobile company has hundreds of primary suppliers and even more secondary and tertiary suppliers. Hubei is one of the major manufacturers of automobiles of China. Volkswagen, BMW, and Hyundai, and other major automobile companies are talking to us. They have lots of components that they need to import from Hubei, but they are having a shortage of stock in their warehouses. So they are expressing concern to us over the suspension of work and production in Hubei. And there are also some domestic companies who have their auxiliary factories in Hubei. For example, Guangdong Automobile Honda. They are also facing this difficulty. So in response to that, we have mobilized industrial regulators of Hubei Province to launch supply to relevant companies by using their stockpile. For example, for some Korean automobile companies, they have wire harness factories in Hubei and some factories in Shandong. So we are coordinating with some factories in certain provinces to prioritize supply to these major automobile companies. That has helped resolve some sticking points. So now Hyundai has resumed its operation and it is normally functioning. At the same time, in light of the epidemic intensity in Hubei, we are also working with the interagency mechanism in Hubei Province to arrange the post-epidemic resumption of production. We hope that the components and parts of automobiles should be a prioritized sector in terms of resumption of production. And in this regard, we have received strong support from the Hubei authorities. Some of the automobile factories and companies inside Hubei have begun resumption of work. Our Dongfeng company has most of its finished vehicle and component operations inside Hubei, so it is one of the most heavily hit companies. And now it has started resumption of some of its operations in Hubei. So the capacity has reached more than 200 vehicles per day. And in Xiangfan, some companies have resumed to work. In Wuhan, the two finished vehicle companies have resumed their operations. One of them is Dongfeng Honda, and the other is Dongfeng's fully owned brand. They are operating with low capacity. So with more efforts, we are already advancing the resumption of production in the automobile manufacturing sector of China. That is a contribution to the whole global industry chain, and we will work even harder to help resolve the difficulties faced by relevant companies and help ensure a stable supply in the global market. That concludes our press conference today. Thank you.